Just 200 years ago, Central Park didn't exist. But what you might not know is that you could still see evidence of 13,000 years of world history right here just by taking a walk in the park. I'm Michael Whitner. I'm an architect, and today we're going to be taking a walk through time in New York Central Music Park. We're standing here at the Columbus Circle entrance to Central Park in New York City, where Broadway intersects 59th Street and Central Park West. This was formerly called Grand Circle, and also just the Circle. This is the most famous entrance of the park, in part because of that connection to Broadway. But Broadway has actually been a thoroughfare in New York City long before Central Park existed. In fact, it goes back to before the city was called New York, and even before it was called New Amsterdam. The native LPE, people living on this island, traveled this very same route for generations, making this one of the busiest paths on the island for around 13,000 years when early Dutch colonizers learned about it. They called it the One-Inch Guac Trail in reference to the tribe of Wenner people who lived on the bank of the Hudson River today. Broadway is famous for many reasons. It is synonymous with theater, and it was the first street in New York City with electric street lamps. But for architects and city planners, one of its most important distinctions is the way it cuts across the street grid of Manhattan at a diagonal. But what might surprise you is that this portion of Broadway is one of the only roads in Manhattan that runs true north. Although Manhattan is often shown oriented vertically on maps, which gives the impression that it runs. Discover more Sugarphone Coffee Shorts video, transcription service, YouTube channel, growth guides, data analysis tools, AI prompt libraries, language translation services. AI transcription service north and south. It's actually tilted off axis from due north by about 29 degrees. Now that we've got our bearings, let's journey northeast into the park back in time. To the formation of the island of Manhattan itself behind me is Glen Span Arch near the northern end of the park at 103rd Street. The stones that make up this arch are actually carved from the bedrock of Manhattan. Although most of the boulders in Central Park are Manhattan schist, which is around 450 million years old, Glen Span Arch is made from a type of stone called forum gneiss, which formed here over 1 billion years ago. These stones were shaped by hand with hammer and chisel into traditional voussoir or wedge-shaped blocks that make up an arch. When you pass through this arch built from stones that are over 1 billion years old, you feel as though you were crossing a portal into an entirely different world. Back to a time before Manhattan was transformed into a gleaming metropolis of brick, steel, and glass. It's a perfect introduction to the north end of the park, which feels the most naturalistic and the most removed from the bustle and hustle of Midtown Manhattan here. You'll find the most picturesque waterfalls in the park, as you might know from our other video on Central Park. Nearly all of its lakes and streams are fed by pipes carrying drinking water. But here, passing under the arch, is where you'll find the only natural water source that still exists in Central Park. It's called Mons Rivulet, and it starts at a body of water called the Pool. It was named after a physician who owned most of the land in this area. In the early 1600s, when New York was still New Amsterdam, this natural stream is mostly underground now, after much of Manhattan was infilled with earth to create more buildable lots, Montine. Rivulet originally flowed all the way to the East River, but today only this small portion remains also underneath. This arch is what's known as the grotto. A grotto is a small artificial cave made to look natural, often with or near a water. Music feature. This obelisk towering over my shoulder is much older than Central Park. In fact, it was carved about 3,500 years ago and more than 5,000 miles away in Heliopolis, Egypt. So how did it get here? This 220-ton artifact carved from a single piece of granite was actually a gift. It was given to the United States by Egypt in the 1870s as a diplomatic gesture. But this wasn't the first time the obelisk had been moved. Although it is called Cleopatra's Needle, it wasn't actually commissioned by Cleopatra. It was originally created for Pharaoh the Third for the Temple of the Sun, near modern-day Cairo 2,000 years later. While under Roman rule, the temple was rediscovered as ruins, and the obelisk and its twin had been toppled over and partially buried in the sand. The Romans dug it up and moved it to Alexandria on the north coast of Egypt to a new temple that was created by Cleopatra, hence the name Cleopatra's Needle. In fact, you could still see evidence from its Roman journey. The bronze crabs that support the obelisk at the base were forged by the Romans as a way to help it balance when they installed it at Cleopatra's temple, the crab sup.